The rain struck the dormitory windows like frantic fingers when Felix heard his name spoken in a voice so raw that his heart stopped. Felix. The word came from Hyunjin's lips like a prayer, trembling, almost broken. Felix froze in the doorway of the practice room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Sweat glistened on Hyunjin's pale skin. His chest rose and fell sharply as if he had run a marathon rather than danced one song over and over again until midnight. His long hair clung to his forehead, and his dark eyes were fixed on Felix with a desperation that made the air feel too thin to breathe. For a moment neither of them moved. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, the world narrowed until there was nothing except Hyunjin standing under the harsh white lights and Felix gripping the doorframe so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I need you to stay," Hyunjin whispered. Felix's throat tightened. He had spent years imagining those words in 1,000 different ways. In dreams, in sleepless nights, in the quiet moments between concerts when the cheers faded and loneliness rushed in. But reality was crueler than fantasy because reality always came with fear. Fear that he had misunderstood every glance. Fear that he was only a convenient comfort. Fear that Hyunjin would take it all back. Felix forced himself to smile, though it trembled at the edges. "I'm here." Hyunjin took one unsteady step forward, then another. When he stood close enough for Felix to smell the familiar mix of sweat, soap, and the faint citrus cologne he always wore, his expression crumbled. "I can't do this anymore." Heart pounded so hard it hurt. "What? Pretend?" The word landed between them like shattered glass. Hyunjin lowered his head, strands of wet hair casting shadows over his eyes. "I pretend that it doesn't hurt when you laugh with someone else. I pretend that I'm okay when you fall asleep on the couch. And I cover you with a blanket because I want to kiss you but I'm too scared. I pretend that being your friend is enough." His breath caught. The room blurred. For years, he had hidden his feelings behind bright smiles and playful teasing. He had buried them beneath schedules and performances and endless travel. He had convinced himself that loving Hyunjin silently was safer than risking everything. Yet now Hyunjin stood before him with tears in his eyes, exposing the same secret Felix had protected with his life. "I love you," Hyunjin said. The words were soft, but they shattered Felix's world. A sob escaped Felix before he could stop it. He laughed through tears, pressing a trembling hand over his mouth as if that might contain the flood of emotions breaking inside him. Hyunjin's face went pale. "Felix, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said." "If this is a dream," Felix whispered, tears sliding freely down his cheeks, "don't wake me up." For one suspended heartbeat, Hyunjin stared at him, then the truth registered, his lips parted in disbelief. "You," Felix nodded, unable to speak. The years of longing, the countless hidden glances, the late-night conversations, the accidental touches that lingered too long, every silent confession lived in that single movement. Hyunjin let out a broken sound somewhere between a laugh and a cry. Then he pulled Felix into his arms. The impact stole the breath from Felix's lungs. Hyunjin held him as if he were afraid the universe might tear them apart if he loosened his grip even slightly. Felix buried his face in Hyunjin's shoulder, trembling with relief. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows like applause. "I thought I lost my chance," Hyunjin murmured into Felix's hair. "You never lost it." "I was terrified," pulled back just enough to see Hyunjin's face. Tears clung to his lashes. "So was I." Hyunjin cupped Felix's cheeks with both hands. His fingers were warm despite the chill in the room. "You have no idea how much I love you." Let out a watery laugh. "I think I'm starting to." Their foreheads touched. The world seemed to exhale. Felix studied every detail of Hyunjin's face as if memorizing a masterpiece he had admired from afar but never dared to touch. The slight tremble of his lips, the vulnerability in his eyes, the softness hidden beneath years of perfectionism and guarded smiles. Hyunjin was brilliant and fragile, beautiful and uncertain. Felix loved every piece. "I used to count the times you looked at me," Hyunjin admitted. Felix blinked. "What?" Hyunjin smiled shyly, his cheeks flushing. "During interviews, on stage, at dinner. I counted because I wanted proof that maybe I wasn't imagining this." Laughed through tears. "I wrote songs I never showed anyone." Hyunjin's eyes widened. "About me," Felix nodded. "About how you make everything brighter." Hyunjin's lower lip quivered. For someone known for words and art, he seemed unable to find any language strong enough for what he felt, so instead he kissed Felix, softly, tentatively, like touching the first ray of sunlight after a long winter. Felix melted, years of yearning dissolved in that gentle contact. Hyunjin's lips were warm and trembling, his hands tender against Felix's face. Felix clutched the front of Hyunjin's shirt as if anchoring himself to reality. When they parted, both were crying again. Felix laughed breathlessly. "You're really here." Hyunjin brushed away his tears with his thumbs. "I'm not going anywhere." They stayed in the practice room long after the music stopped. They sat on the polished wooden floor with their backs against the mirrored wall, fingers intertwined. Hyunjin traced invisible circles over Felix's knuckles while they confessed the small secrets they had carried for years. The first moment they realized their feelings were no longer friendship, the jealousies they never admitted, the sleepless nights spent wondering if they were alone. Hyunjin revealed how his greatest fear had never been rejection. "It was losing you," he said quietly. "I thought if I told you, you might look at me differently." Leaned his head on Hyunjin's shoulder. "I was afraid of the same thing." Irony made them laugh. Two hearts equally terrified had wasted years protecting themselves from the very happiness they both wanted. As dawn approached, the rain softened to a whisper. The city lights shimmered through the windows like distant stars. Hyunjin tilted his head to rest against Felix's. "Do you know what I imagined?" Felix smiled. "What? A life where I could tell you this every day." Turn to face him. "Then start now." Hyunjin smiled, a smile so radiant it made Felix's chest ache. "I love you." Kissed him once slowly. "I love you too." The words settled into the room like a promise, not dramatic, not uncertain, simply true. When they finally returned to the dorm, the sun was rising over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The others were still asleep. The world remained blissfully unaware that something extraordinary had happened. Hyunjin laced their fingers together as they stood in the quiet kitchen. Felix looked at their intertwined hands and felt tears prick his eyes once more. For years, love had seemed like a beautiful impossibility, something to write songs about but never possess. Yet here it was, warm fingers, sleepy smiles, a heart finally at peace. Hyunjin kissed his forehead. "You're crying again," laughed softly. "I can't help it." "Why?" Felix touched Hyunjin's cheek, his voice trembling with wonder. "Because for so long loving you felt like wishing on a star I could never reach." Hyunjin pressed their foreheads together. "Now," Felix smiled through tears, the kind of smile that came from the deepest part of his soul. "Now my favorite dream is standing right in front of me." The sun rose higher, filling the room with light, and in that golden morning, with Hyunjin's arms around him and love no longer hidden, Felix understood that some dreams were not meant to end, some dreams were meant to become home. The first morning of loving Hyunjin felt impossibly quiet. Felix woke before the others, as he always did when his thoughts were too bright to let him sleep. For a moment he lay still beneath the blanket, staring at the faint lines of sunlight stretching across the ceiling. Then he felt it, warm fingers intertwined with his under the blanket. Felix turned his head. Hyunjin was sleeping beside him, not in a dream. Not in one of the countless fantasies Felix had replayed in his mind during lonely nights. Real. Hyunjin's silver-blonde hair was tousled, his lips slightly parted, his breathing soft and steady. One arm was draped across Felix's waist, as if even in sleep he was afraid Felix might disappear. Felix's chest tightened. He bit his lip to stop another wave of tears. He had cried so much in the past 12 hours that his eyes were swollen, but looking at Hyunjin there in the pale morning light made his heart overflow all over again. Carefully, Felix brushed a strand of hair from Hyunjin's forehead. Hyunjin stirred immediately. His eyelashes fluttered. The moment his eyes opened and met Felix's, something tender and disbelieving passed over his face. Then he smiled. A real smile. The kind he only showed when his heart was completely unguarded. "Good morning," Hyunjin whispered, his voice rough with sleep. Felix laughed softly. "You're still here." Hyunjin's expression turned emotional. He lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to Felix's knuckles. "Where else would I be?" Felix felt his throat close. Hyunjin noticed the tears gathering in his eyes and chuckled, brushing his thumb gently over Felix's cheek. "You promised me we'd stop crying." "I lied." Hyunjin leaned forward and kissed him. This kiss was slower than the first one in the practice room, unhurried, certain, the kind of kiss that said, "We have time now." When they pulled apart, Felix rested his forehead against Hyunjin's and closed his eyes. "I'm scared," he admitted. Hyunjin's fingers tightened around his. "Of what?" Felix hesitated. "Of waking up and finding out this was one beautiful mistake." Hyunjin sat up slightly and cupped Felix's face. His gaze was steady, unwavering. "Look at me." "Did." "You are not a mistake," Hyunjin said. "Loving you is the most honest thing I've ever done." Sincerity in his voice shattered the last pieces of Felix's doubt. He threw his arms around Hyunjin and buried his face in his neck. Hyunjin laughed softly and held him close. The room filled with the scent of fabric softener and warm skin and the steady rhythm of Hyunjin's heartbeat. Felix listened to it as if it were music. For years he had danced to songs written for millions. But this sound, this quiet, human heartbeat beneath his ear, felt more precious than any melody. Eventually, footsteps echoed in the hallway. A door creaked open, then came a sleepy voice. "Why is Felix crying at 7 in the morning?" Both of them froze. Felix pulled away so quickly he nearly fell off the bed. Standing in the doorway was Bang Chan, hair disheveled, holding a half-empty bottle of water. He blinked once, then twice. His eyes dropped to their intertwined hands. Silence. Felix felt his face burn. Hyunjin looked as if he might spontaneously combust. Chan stared for another long second before his expression softened. A smile spread across his face. "Oh," he said quietly. Felix opened his mouth but no sound came out. Chan set the water bottle on the dresser and walked into the room. For one terrifying moment, Felix feared they would have to explain everything. Instead, Chan pulled both of them into a tight hug. "I was wondering how long it would take." Felix blinked. "What?" Chan stepped back, grinning. "You two have been in love forever." Hyunjin covered his face. "We were not that obvious." Chan laughed. "You were painfully obvious." Let out a relieved laugh, tears threatening to return. Chan ruffled his hair affectionately. "You deserve this, Lix." The simple words struck Felix harder than he expected. You deserve this. For years, part of him had believed his love had to remain hidden because wanting too much might cost him everything. Hearing someone he trusted say he deserved happiness felt like the opening of a locked door inside his heart. "Thank you," Felix whispered. Chan squeezed his shoulder. "Get dressed before the others wake up and start a betting pool over who confesses first." Hyunjin groaned. "There was a betting pool." Chan smirked. "I'm not saying there was, I'm just saying Han Jisung owes me money." When Chan left, Felix and Hyunjin dissolved into laughter. The tension that had haunted them for years felt lighter now. Shared, accepted, real. Later that morning they sat together at the kitchen table while the dorm slowly came alive. Felix stirred his cereal absent-mindedly, unable to stop smiling. Hyunjin sat close enough that their knees touched beneath the table. Every few minutes, Felix glanced over just to reassure himself that Hyunjin was truly there. Each time, Hyunjin met his gaze with the same soft smile. At one point, Hyunjin reached under the table and took Felix's hand. No one said anything. No one needed to. The others noticed, of course. There were knowing smiles, teasing comments, and exaggerated gasps. But beneath the jokes was genuine warmth, a sense that something long overdue had finally happened. That evening, after schedules and rehearsals, Felix and Hyunjin returned to the rooftop. The rain from the night before had washed the city clean. The sky stretched above them in shades of violet and silver. A cool breeze stirred Hyunjin's hair. Felix leaned against the railing, watching the lights twinkle below. "It feels different," he said. Hyunjin stood behind him, wrapping his arms around Felix's waist. "How?" Felix covered Hyunjin's hands with his own. "For the first time in years, I'm not hiding." Hyunjin kissed the back of his neck. "You never have to hide from me again." Closed his eyes. The words settled deep inside him, soothing wounds he had carried silently for too long. He turned in Hyunjin's embrace. "Promise." Hyunjin brushed his nose against Felix's. "Every day," smiled, then his expression grew thoughtful. "Do you ever regret waiting so long?" Hyunjin considered the question. His fingers traced the curve of Felix's jaw. "I regret every night you doubted how loved you are." Sighs filled. "I don't regret the journey," Hyunjin continued, "because it led me here." Touched his forehead to Felix's. "To you." Kissed him slowly, pouring years of unspoken devotion into the moment. When they parted, the city lights blurred through his tears. This time he did not cry from longing, he cried from gratitude, because love was no longer a distant dream. It was Hyunjin's arms around him. It was a promise whispered under the stars. It was the certainty that after all the waiting, all the fear, and all the silent wishing, they had finally found the courage to choose each other. And for the first time in his life, Felix did not ask the dream to last forever. He knew with quiet and unwavering certainty that this was real.
Days passed like pages from a story Felix had once written in the margins of his heart. Everything looked the same from the outside. The same rehearsals, the same flights, the same bright stage lights and crowded dressing rooms, yet every ordinary moment now carried a secret warmth. A brush of fingers under the table, a private smile across the practice room, a quiet, "I love you" mouthed when no one else was watching. Felix found himself noticing details he had overlooked before. The way Hyunjin unconsciously searched for him in every room. The way his shoulders relaxed the instant their eyes met. The way his voice softened whenever he said Felix's name. It was as if the world had been painted in muted colors for years, and someone had suddenly turned on the light. One evening, after a long day of filming, the members gathered in the living room. Movies played on the television, half watched as everyone talked over one another. Felix sat on the floor, his back resting against the couch. Hyunjin sat behind him. Without hesitation, Hyunjin threaded his fingers through Felix's hair and gently massaged his scalp. The touch was absent-minded, affectionate, completely natural. Felix closed his eyes, His body melted against the couch. The room smelled of popcorn and laundry detergent. Laughter echoed around them. Someone argued dramatically about the plot of the movie, but all Felix could focus on was Hyunjin's fingers moving through his hair with impossible tenderness. "You're purring," Lino observed dryly. Felix's eyes flew open. "I am not." "You absolutely are," Han Ji-sung said, pointing accusingly. Hyunjin laughed. Felix hid his face in his hands while the others burst into laughter. "Leave him alone," Hyunjin said, his voice warm. The protectiveness in his tone made Felix's ears burn. He peeked through his fingers. Hyunjin was smiling at him with such naked affection that Felix forgot how to breathe. The teasing eventually faded. The movie continued. And Felix drifted to sleep with his head in Hyunjin's lap, feeling safer than he ever had. Later that night, he woke to find the living room dark and silent. The television had been turned off. The others were gone. Only Hyunjin remained. He sat perfectly still, one hand resting in Felix's hair. Moonlight spilled across the room, silver and soft. Felix looked up. "You didn't wake me." Hyunjin smiled. "You looked peaceful." Sat up slowly, blanket slipping from his shoulders. The quiet felt intimate, sacred. "I used to dream about this," Felix admitted. Hyunjin tilted his head. "This, falling asleep next to you and knowing I was exactly where I belonged." Emotion flickered across Hyunjin's face. He reached for Felix's hand. "You are where you belong." Swallowed hard, a shadow crossed his expression. "Sometimes I still worry." Hyunjin's brow furrowed. "About what?" Felix stared at their intertwined fingers. "That one day you'll realize I'm too much." The confession emerged so softly it was almost lost in the silence. Hyunjin lifted Felix's chin. His eyes were fierce with sincerity. "To me," met his gaze. "I love your bright days and your quiet days. I love how you laugh until you can't breathe. I love how deeply you care about everyone around you. I love the parts of you that still feel uncertain." Hyunjin pressed a trembling kiss to Felix's forehead. "You could never be too much for someone who has loved you this long." Felix's vision blurred. He leaned forward, wrapping his arms around Hyunjin. For several minutes, they held each other without speaking. No dramatic declarations. No fear. Only the quiet certainty of two hearts learning that love did not require perfection. It required presence, trust, and the courage to stay. Weeks turned into months. Their relationship became woven into everyday life, morning kisses before schedules, shared headphones during flights, late-night conversations when sleep refused to come. Sometimes they laughed until their stomachs hurt. Sometimes they sat together in comfortable silence. Sometimes they spoke about the years they had spent pretending. Each conversation peeled away another layer of fear. And with every passing day, Felix felt himself healing. The loneliness he had hidden behind bright smiles began to fade. The doubt that once whispered he was unlovable grew quieter. Hyunjin loved him patiently, consistently, and without conditions. One autumn evening, they returned to the same practice room where everything had changed. The lights were dim. The mirrors reflected two figures standing close together. Felix looked around, memories flooding back. "This room used to terrify me." Hyunjin wrapped his arms around him from behind. "Now," Felix rested against him. "Now it feels like the place where my life began." Hyunjin turned him gently to face him. Golden leaves drifted outside the window, catching the last light of sunset. "I still remember what you said." Smiled. "If this is a dream, don't wake me up." Hyunjin brushed tears from the corners of Felix's eyes. "It wasn't a dream." "No," Felix whispered, his voice trembling with gratitude. "It was better." Hyunjin kissed him slowly, reverently. Years of longing had transformed into something steady and enduring, not just passion, not just hope. Home. When they finally stepped outside, the night air was crisp and sweet. Felix looked up at the stars scattered across the sky. He thought of the boy he used to be, the one who loved in silence, who feared he was asking for too much, who wished on distant lights and expected nothing in return. If he could speak to that version of himself now, he would say only this: wait a little longer. The love you are afraid to believe in is already making its way to you. Felix tightened his hand around Hyunjin's. Hyunjin smiled and kissed his knuckles. Together, they walked into the night, no longer wondering, no longer hiding, only loving. And under the vast and glittering sky, Felix understood that the most beautiful dreams are not the ones we wake from. They are the ones we choose to live, every single day, with the person who makes our heart feel like home. Winter arrived quietly. The city turned silver beneath pale skies, and the dorm windows fogged each morning from the warmth inside. Schedules grew busier, rehearsals longer, and the nights shorter. Yet no matter how exhausting the days became, Felix always found the same comfort waiting for him. Hyunjin. Sometimes it was a cup of tea left beside Felix's laptop when he stayed up too late composing. Sometimes it was a hand on the small of his back as they moved through crowded airports. Sometimes it was nothing more than a glance from across a stage. Brief, steady, and full of a love so certain that Felix felt stronger just from being seen. One night, snow began to fall while they were returning from practice. The streets glowed under yellow streetlights. Snowflakes drifted in slow spirals, settling on Hyunjin's dark coat and in Felix's blonde hair. Felix tilted his face toward the sky, laughing softly as the cold touched his skin. "It's beautiful." Hyunjin stopped walking. Felix turned. Hyunjin was looking at him with the same expression he wore when he was trying to memorize something precious. Felix asked, smiling. Hyunjin stepped closer and brushed melting snow from Felix's eyelashes. "You are." Words were simple, but they struck Felix with the same force as that first confession in the practice room. His cheeks flushed. "You always say things like that. Because they're true." Lowered his gaze, shy even after months of hearing Hyunjin say he was loved. There were still moments when his heart struggled to believe it, moments when old insecurities returned and whispered that happiness this perfect could not possibly last. Hyunjin seemed to sense every one of those moments. He took Felix's gloved hands in his own and held them against his chest. "Tell me what you're thinking." Felix hesitated, then he answered honestly. "I'm afraid I'll never stop feeling surprised." Hyunjin's brow furrowed. "Surprised? That you chose me." Vulnerability in Felix's voice hung between them. Snow continued to fall around them, soft and silent. Hyunjin's eyes shimmered. "I didn't choose you once," he said quietly. "I choose you every day." Felt tears sting his eyes. "Every morning," Hyunjin continued. "Every rehearsal, every flight, every ordinary moment, I choose you." His thumb brushed over Felix's knuckles. "And I will keep choosing you." Let out a shaky breath. The cold air filled his lungs, but warmth spread through his chest. He stepped into Hyunjin's arms. The world seemed to disappear. There was only the muffled hush of snow, the steady beat of Hyunjin's heart, and the certainty of being loved without conditions. When they reached the dorm later that night, everyone else was asleep. The apartment was dim and quiet. Felix and Hyunjin stood in the kitchen, still wearing their coats, reluctant to end the moment. Hyunjin tucked a strand of hair behind Felix's ear. "I have something for you." Blinked. "Now," Hyunjin nodded and disappeared into his room. He returned carrying a small sketchbook. The cover was worn at the edges, evidence that it had been opened many times. Hyunjin placed it carefully in Felix's hands. Felix looked up. "What is this?" "A secret," Hyunjin said with a nervous smile. "One I should have shared a long time ago." Opened the sketchbook. His breath caught. The first page held a drawing of himself asleep on the couch. The next showed Felix laughing during a late-night cooking session. Another captured him on stage, bathed in light. Page after page revealed moments Felix did not even know had been noticed. Tiny, ordinary moments. The way he tucked his hands into oversized sleeves. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The way he looked at Hyunjin when he thought no one was watching. At the back of the sketchbook, a single sentence was written in careful handwriting. "I loved you in every moment, even before I knew how to say it." Tears spilled onto the page. Felix covered his mouth with one hand. Hyunjin stood before him, suddenly uncertain. "I wanted you to know how long you've been the center of my world." Closed the sketchbook and threw his arms around him. He held Hyunjin so tightly that both of them trembled. "No one has ever loved me like this," Felix whispered. Hyunjin buried his face in Felix's shoulder. "No one has ever inspired me like you." They stayed there in the quiet kitchen, wrapped in each other's arms while snow drifted beyond the windows. Eventually, Felix pulled back and reached for Hyunjin's hand. "Come with me." He led Hyunjin to his room. From the drawer of his bedside table, Felix removed a folder of handwritten lyrics. For months, years in some cases, he had poured his feelings into songs he never intended anyone to hear. Tonight, he placed them in Hyunjin's hands. "These are yours." Hyunjin looked down at the pages. The titles alone were enough to make his eyes fill with tears. "Golden Light, Home. If this is a dream," he pressed the lyrics to his chest. "You wrote all of these for me?" Felix nodded. Every word. Hyunjin's lips trembled. "Then I think we've been confessing to each other for a very long time." Laughed through tears. "Yes." They sat on the floor together until dawn. Hyunjin turned pages of lyrics while Felix studied sketches drawn with quiet devotion. Each page was proof that their love had existed long before either of them found the courage to name it. Outside, the snow covered the city in white. Inside, Two hearts continued telling each other the same truth in different forms, in songs, in drawings, in trembling smiles, in whispered promises. When the first light of morning touched the room, Hyunjin rested his head on Felix's shoulder. I used to wonder what happiness would feel like. Intertwined their fingers. And now, Hyunjin kissed his temple. It feels like this. Closed his eyes and smiled. The snow kept falling. The world remained still. And in the gentle silence of winter, with their secrets finally shared and their hearts fully known, Felix understood that love was not only found in grand confessions. Sometimes it lived in the pages we kept hidden, waiting for the right person to read them. Spring arrived with a softness that felt almost unreal. The snow melted from the rooftops. Cherry blossoms unfurled along the streets, painting the city in shades of pink and white. Warm sunlight spilled through the dorm windows each morning, and with it came a sense of renewal. Felix had always loved spring. But this year, every flower, every breeze, every streak of gold across the sky seemed to carry Hyunjin's name. Their love had settled into something both extraordinary and wonderfully ordinary. Hyunjin still kissed Felix's forehead when he was half asleep. Felix still reached for Hyunjin's hand without thinking. They still laughed over burnt pancakes, argued playfully over playlists, and stayed awake until dawn talking about nothing and everything. The magic had not faded. It had deepened. One afternoon, after a long rehearsal, Felix found Hyunjin alone in the studio. Music played softly through the speakers. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, turning dust into glittering constellations. Hyunjin stood in front of the mirror, sketchbook tucked under one arm, his expression distant. Felix approached quietly. "What are you thinking about?" Hyunjin turned. A smile appeared, but there was a hint of emotion behind it, about how much has changed. Stepped closer. Good changed. The best kind. Hyunjin set the sketchbook aside and took Felix's hands. "For years, I thought loving you would always be a beautiful secret." He lifted Felix's left hand and pressed a kiss to his fingertips. "Now you're the first person I want to tell everything to." His chest tightened with tenderness. "You already are for me." Hyunjin smiled, then his expression grew serious. "There's something I want to ask you." His heartbeat quickened. The words were simple. But the way Hyunjin looked at him made the entire world seem to hold its breath. Hyunjin reached into his bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Felix unfolded it. It was a drawing. Two figures stood beneath a star-filled sky, fingers intertwined. One was unmistakably Felix. The other was Hyunjin. Above them, in Hyunjin's elegant handwriting, were the words, "No matter where life takes us, will you keep walking beside me?" Felix stared at the drawing. His vision blurred with tears. He looked up. Hyunjin was trembling, not because he doubted Felix's love, but because some questions matter so much that asking them still feels like stepping into the unknown. Felix let out a tearful laugh. "You made me think I was prepared for this." Hyunjin's lips quivered. "Are you?" Felix stepped forward and cupped his face. His voice shook with emotion. "I would choose you in every lifetime." Hyunjin's eyes filled. Felix kissed him once, softly. Then he whispered the answer Hyunjin had carried in his heart long before he ever found the courage to ask. Hyunjin broke into tears. So did Felix. They laughed and cried at the same time, clinging to each other as if trying to hold the entire universe in their arms. When they finally pulled apart, Hyunjin rested his forehead against Felix's. "I don't have a ring," smiled through tears. "You have me. You have me." That evening, they returned to the rooftop where they had shared so many promises. The city lights shimmered below them like scattered stars. A warm breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. Felix leaned against Hyunjin's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never saying anything?" Hyunjin intertwined their fingers. "All the time." Looked up at the sky. "Now," Hyunjin kissed the top of his head. "Now I think about all the mornings we still get to wake up together." Closed his eyes. The words settled in his heart with quiet certainty. Love was no longer something distant and fragile. It was a future, not defined by dramatic moments, but by everyday choices, by staying, by listening, by continuing to choose each other when the world was loud and uncertain. Months later, under a sky washed in gold and lavender, their closest friends gathered in a garden filled with roses and candles. There were no elaborate speeches, no need for grand declarations. The truth had already been spoken in countless ways, in hidden sketches, in unfinished songs, in whispered promises before dawn. When Felix walked toward Hyunjin, his heart was overflowing. Hyunjin stood waiting, eyes shining with the same love Felix had seen on the night everything changed. the same love that had remained constant through every season. When they reached each other, the world seemed to fade. Only their joined hands remained, only the steady certainty of two hearts that had finally found home. Hyunjin smiled, tears slipping down his cheeks. Still dreaming, Felix touched his face with reverent tenderness. No, he kissed Hyunjin softly as the sunset wrapped them in golden light. Then he whispered the truth that had guided him from the very beginning. Exactly where I'm meant to be. As their friends cheered, as the wind carried the scent of roses through the evening air, and as the stars slowly appeared above them, Felix understood that some love stories do not end with a confession. They begin there. And they continue through every season, every sunrise, and every ordinary moment that becomes extraordinary when shared with the person you love. If this was once a dream, it had become something far more beautiful. A life, a promise, a home, and in Hyunjin's arms, Felix knew he would never need to wake up.